Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Seattle, the fourth oldest and one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world. So now it's time for our short program today. Roberto Dondisch is the Consul General from Mexico. He is stationed here in Seattle. Dr. Dondisch has represented Mexico at the highest levels on the world stage. He has negotiated arms treaties. He negotiated the Paris Climate Change Accord. I've asked him today to give us his perspective on our government's decision to end the DACA program, which gives protection to about 800,000 undocumented immigrants brought here by their parents when they were children. He will also end with an announcement about the upcoming Mexican-American Festival here in Seattle. So please give a warm Rotary welcome to our fellow member, Roberto Dondisch.
Thank you very much, Mark, and fellow Rotarians. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, David, as well, for organizing this, and what a better day to do it than when Father Steve will be talking about leadership. So let me take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about DACA. Some of you might already know a lot about it, some might not. So why don't we go look at a little bit about the basics? And I'll be, as Consul of Mexico, we're very careful of not engaging or criticizing the right of the United States to make its own immigration policy. But I will tell you about what we've been hearing in the community, so that you have a better understanding of why is this such an important issue. So first of all, it's DACA, as it's a Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. What it is an executive determination that certain people are not going to be in the first, let's say, the first ones to be deported. That's basically it. But it also allows these individuals to have working permits and social security numbers so that they can live and work in the United States. Now, why is it so important? First of all, let's understand that DACA only applies to a specific group of individuals. Those people who came to the US before June 15, 2012, when they did so, they were under 16 years of age, have lived continuously in the US since then, have either completed high school or GED, are currently enrolled in high school, are members of the armed forces, or have been honorably discharged from the armed forces. It is also necessary for these individuals not to have any felony convictions in their past and no more than 3 misdemeanor convictions. They apply to this program, they pay $575, they go through background checks, and then a determination is made if they get this, if the program applies to them or not. If they do, they get a card which allows them to work in the US and to get a social security number. And in general has been understood as also signal for immigration, ICE agents, CBP, not to deport or to detain, although that's not always the case. And we've had cases like Daniel Ramirez here in the surrounds of Seattle, where we clearly saw a situation in which a kid who had DACA status was nevertheless detained, and the moment they detained him, he loses that DACA status. Now, so it's very important to understand that. According to different studies, there are about 1.1 to 1.5 million people who fall into this category that meet all the required standards, but only 787,580 applications have been approved. Not everybody's applying because many people were worried from the beginning about putting their information in a government database. Because part of the plan of the program, the logic of DACA, was to get these kids out of the shadows. They lived here, they don't know all their homes. Many of them, the large majority are from Mexico. So from this almost 800,000, a little bit over 600,000 are from Mexico. But most of them don't know Mexico. They don't have a home in Mexico where they can go back to. Many of them don't even speak Spanish. They got here when they were very little. Many of them didn't know they were here without papers until they actually wanted to apply to go to a university. And this is part of a shock for many of them. And at the same time, the burden that has been put on them to show themselves as excellent citizens, even though they're not citizens, has created also a situation of stress among many of them. Why? Because they can't have a conviction of a misdemeanor because they're a loser DACA status. You know, they can't make a mistake. They can't go out and have a drink even though they're 22 and then get in trouble because maybe their friend they're going out with who's a citizen won't have, nothing will happen to them, but they might actually lose their DACA status and get deported. So this is the reality where they live. So the whole idea of DACA was to give these kids some logic of basic principles which would allow them to have a normal life. Normal with some limits, because if they want to leave the US, for instance, they have to ask for special permit. But this is how what the DACA program does. Now, it was an executive decision. It didn't go through Congress. And we're hearing a lot about President Trump saying, well, now what we want is Congress to actually go through it. So there's a case to be made there. But what I can tell you from the DACA kids, from what we're hearing, is that the problem is that many of the groups that are making the case about the DACA program not being one that went through Congress are the same groups that have proven to be anti-immigration groups for a long time. And that they're worried that the DACA situation will be used as an exchange for something else, either money for the wall or something else that would actually go maybe against the well-being of their own parents. So that's a little bit of where we are. That's where DACA is, and of course we could talk more about this, but this is where we are. I'm not going to go, I have more time to go into this, but hopefully it helps get some idea of where we are. By the way, 18,000 of them are in Washington State, many of them at Seattle UW, Washington State University. But then, just going to another topic before I have to finish, but it's part of the same. Part of what we have to do is to make sure that we know each other better. That we change the rhetoric that we've had since last year in terms of understanding what Mexico and the Mexican-American community is here. And because of that, we've organized the first MEXAM, Mexican-American, MEXAM Northwest Festival. And you'll find in your tables some information of the festival. We have everything. We are going to have a chef from Mexico coming over and presenting a dinner with Tom Douglas. He's going to also give a culinary class. We're going to have a wine-off. How many of you know actually that Mexico wines are pretty good? So we're going to have a wine-off. Washington State wines, Mexico wines, and especially if you come on Tuesday, we're going to have a wine-off for Rotarians. So we hope to see you there. We'll also have the business event. We're going to have more than 25 business people from Mexico coming over, trying to establish more links, more business opportunities. Please come in. There are still spaces. September 12th and the 13th over at Seattle Public Library. Everything is online, mexamnw.com. You can register. Many of the events are free. Some have a recuperation cost, But please join us. It's very important to see you there. It's part of getting the dialogue going and part of showing the support that we need at this point. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Roberto, thank you. I feel like maybe a long program on DACA and immigration may be coming later in the year. There's a lot to unpack there. Now for our main program speaker. In my experience, there are two kinds of speakers. One causes you to look at your watch and wonder, when is this speech going to be over? And maybe some of you are thinking, as you're looking at me, when is he going to be quiet? Then there's another kind of speaker that is so engaging and inspiring that you say to yourself, I wish this speech wouldn't end. It's that feeling you get near the end of a great book or a great movie. And I have to be honest, every time I hear Father Steve talk, over the years, I just think, I just wish this speech would keep going because it's so rich. Father Steve has served as president of Seattle University for going on 21 years now, 7,500 students now. Over that time, enrollment has grown by 1,500. Seattle U is in the top third of all Jesuit universities in overall size and endowment. The latest U.S. News & World Report ranked SU in its top 10 comprehensive non-research schools in the West, and its current endowment stands at about $185 million. But to Father Steve, it's not about the money. It's about educating young people who will use that education to serve and change the world. Father Steve is here to share with us what he's learned about leadership over his career. Please give a warm welcome to our member, Father Steve Sundborg.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate very much being invited to speak again at my Rotary 4. I think this is the 5th time I've been invited to speak in my 20 years, and especially to do so in this year when we're focusing on a series on leadership. I've learned that you can give a speech and you can say certain things depending on who you're speaking to. And so I can speak to you about leadership in a more personal kind of a way because you know me, and more importantly, I know you and the kind of persons you are, your commitment to service above self, and the kind of supportive fellowship we enjoy and we try to foster among ourselves here. Now, I say this because leadership is a very personal, even an intimate kind of thing. It's as personal as is family or friends or feelings or values or love. Leadership in its actuality is not found in handbooks or in manuals on leadership skills, but rather is found in people, in persons, unique people with a particular kind of leadership. That's why it's so valuable this year that we are exploring leadership from so many different people and from so many different angles. So my topic today, because of the angle that I bring to the experience of leadership, is a Jesuit university president's personal lessons on leadership. In my now more than 20 years as a university president, I've had as chairs of my board of trustees and as my mentors the following people: John Ellis, Jim Sinegal, Steve Hooper, Phyllis Campbell, Betty Woods, Bob Ratliff. Each of them is a leader in her or his own way, and together they're the proof that leadership is indeed very personal, very differing, very powerful, and very unique. I speak to you today, and I speak from my years of experience of leadership as the president of a university, because I believe that each of you is a leader in your own way, not just some of you, and that there's nothing that so evokes and helps us understand, to cherish, and to grow in our own leadership than a dialogue with someone else about experience. So here goes. I should start by saying that I was not sure I wanted to be president of Seattle U when it was offered to me. It seemed just too big, and I felt too small. I was given a call in London after I had come and interviewed by the chair of the search committee, and he said, "Steve, congratulations, the Board of Trustees has elected you as the next president of Seattle University, and they want to tell you just 3 things. You lack all academic administrative experience. You have no knowledge of finances, and you've never done significant fundraising. Nevertheless, they believe you'll be a great president. They believed in who I was, that I'm a good Jesuit, that I love students, and that I have a certain quality of person and of leadership. So it's from that I derive what I consider to be my lessons for leadership. So let me give you a little bit of context. Being president of Seattle U is a very, very complex role. The president of the University of California, Clark Kerr, once said, being a university president is less like being a CEO and more like being the mayor of a city. He said that because of all the constituencies that a college president has. For me, it means a university of 7,500 students at all levels of higher education. It means 1,600 faculty and staff, 80,000 alumni, a 40-person board of trustees, thousands of donors, an annual budget of about $215 million, which is 90% dependent upon tuition, the need to fundraise about $40 million a year, being fully engaged in the civic community and with key partners, serving on multiple boards, living as a Jesuit within a Jesuit community, maintaining a prayer life, giving about 250 talks a year, in which about 10 of which I say something, and I hope this is one of them, and holding and articulating the mission of our university and holding it all together and moving it forward, also while dealing with tens of thousands of sports fans, and doing that consistently and doing it over a long period of time. When I started, my predecessor, Father Bill Sullivan, told me that since he was the 20th president of Seattle University and had served for 20 years, and since I was the 21st president, I needed to serve for 21 years. No way, I thought. In my first 5 years, as I was finding my way, I just hated the question that people asked, do you enjoy being president? Enjoy? That's too big, too difficult. It's too all-consuming to apply the word enjoy. Now I can say I do enjoy it, but it's an enjoyment which is more about being meaningful or satisfying or hugely worthwhile or always a cause of growing and learning and serving, a kind of a fullness of feeling and a fulfilling of my own religious calling. So I am in my 21st year. And there's nothing like this context, I might say this vortex of being a university president, that helps you to grow personally, to deepen, and to learn some things about leadership. My first lesson is, in my mind, the core of what leadership is about. I call it the integration of the I and the it. The it is the set of responsibilities, the demands of the position, the thousands of expectations that others all around you have about what you should do, how you should do it, and who you should be. There's no leadership without an it. We can't avoid it. But if we live only into that it, that set of demands and expectations, we're trying to live others' lives rather than our own life. We're living not firsthand, but secondhand, not your life, but theirs. And to try to exclusively meet up to those expectations is deadly. I know that because I tried, and I had a heart attack after my very first year as president of Seattle U. The it, when that's the only thing that you're about, can kill you. Now, the other necessary element of leadership is the I. For me, that's a guy who was a shy, sensitive kid growing up in the territory of Alaska, a somewhat introverted person who needs a lot of privacy, a person who from the age of 3 knew that he wanted to be a Catholic priest, someone who owes everything and loves extraordinarily the Jesuits, lives in a brotherhood and community, a person of a rather philosophical mind and a somewhat poetic heart. That's the I. That's who I am. Now, you can't just be I in leadership either. You'll last about a week. You can't just be me. The core, in my mind, the grand lesson on which everything else depends about leadership is the integration of the I and the it. It's as simple as that, and it's as difficult as that. What it means is finding the way the I of who you are gives shape and direction and energy and light and life and power to the it. How does who you are most personally flow into and give form to your leadership? This integration of the I and the it flows the other way just as importantly. How does the it, the demands, the expectations, the context, how does it draw you out? How does it change you? How does it expand you? How does it deepen or make you grow or open up new potentialities and creativity in you? I believe that there's nothing, perhaps nothing next to love, that so makes a person grow as does integrated leadership. Everything about leadership depends on this core of the integration of the I and the it. Without this heart, the rest of it is somewhat superficial or mechanical, not genuine, mere performance. My second personal lesson on leadership from my 20 years of experience picks up on the Jesuit values, the Jesuit dimension, and it applies it to all forms of leadership. It asks the question, what are the renewing and empowering sources of integrated leadership? Another way to ask that is, where does the I draw its life to meet and shape the demands of leadership? So if I start with myself, and remember, leadership is a very personal thing, so you only talk about it in a personal way. The sources of my leadership come from an hour every single morning, made up of being present to my truth in silence before God, which I call prayer, some pondering of Scripture, a daily dipping during that hour and enjoying poetry, which gets to the tender roots underneath life, and some journaling time, reflecting on how I lived the previous day and how I live the next one. That's the wellspring of the I and its integration with my responsibilities. I would not give up that hour for anything. Sometimes when I'm traveling and I do it in a lounge at SeaTac Airport, or I get on the plane and I lean back and I do my hour at that time. I simply will not miss it. It's the anchor of who I am. It's getting the bubble in the plane between the lines so that my life is in balance. Someone once said that the recipe for healthy living, living fully in terms of resourcing oneself, is a day an hour, a day a week, an hour a day a week, a weekend a month, a week a year. An hour a day a week, a weekend a month, a week a year. I find some of this on walks on the weekend around Green Lake, or a weekend in a cabin, or an annual retreat. Most people tell me that the hardest of that formula is finding the hour a day. So that's my way. But how about other people? They may find it from running or jogging or biking or working out or hiking, a resourcing of the self through those means, the I. Some others find it in conversation with a friend, in family, in love of a partner. Some may find it in music or in art or films or reading over a good meal or in a forest or anywhere near water. We all need it just to live healthily, fully, living our true life, our only life. We need it even more in leadership, if it is to be empowered leadership which sustains itself. By the way, no one has ever burned out in leadership by working too long or too hard. You burn out only because of an unresolved conflict between the I and the it inside the work. Those unresolved internal personal conflicts are the tectonic plates which grind against one another, the I against the it, and produce the tension and the heat which causes burnout. My third lesson comes from my experience of students. You may come to know it through working with your own children or with other young people. You have to love students if you do what I do. You have to connect and engage with them. You have to roll with and keep up with their changes. You have to try to understand students and to let them know who you are. This is not so easy when you're 74, as I am, and becoming the same age as their grandparents. The key here is that in every student there is a hope, a light, an ideal, an optimism, a vision, a passion, which may be buried in them, both from them and from us, beneath layers and layers of distraction, cynicism, anger, discontent, fear, the dictates of our American culture, peer pressure, uncertainties of identity, an experienced lack of voice, an emerging but unrealized adulthood, and sometimes serious issues of health. But I have learned you have to accept them as they are, respect them for who they are on a daily basis, renew your love of them for who they are, and always speak to and appeal to that hope, that light, that ideal, that vision, that good heart that is hidden within them. I had an occasion this year when 15 senior students invited me to come and to talk to them about how I discern life decisions. And so I was telling them about how I went about that, and I mentioned the fact about being present to the truth of myself in silence. And I had this sort of puzzled look on the eyes of the students, and I said, well, I take it that every one of you wants to be present to the truth of yourself in silence. I take it that every one of you wants to be present to the truth of yourself in silence. And I got silence. And then two students spoke up for the behalf of the others, and they said, we're told that when you're present to the truth of yourself in silence, you'll find peace. When I do it, I find anxiety. Now that single sentence was more important and more disturbing to me than any other sentence I heard in the entire year. There's nothing that equals it. It touches the very heart of what I most of all want to be about for our students, to help them to discern life choices in depth from the truth of themselves, from peaceful and assured possession of themselves. Now, certainly the omnipresent and omnipotent distractions and overload from technology has much to do with this lack of being able to be present to yourself, but so too does our society, our country, our world, our culture within which we live. In a book by Sherry Turkle called Reclaiming Conversation, she says that in the past 10 years, the measures of empathy in college students have declined by 40%. In the last 10 years, the measures of empathy in college students have declined by 40%. Empathy is the ability to put yourself into the shoes of another, to imagine how life feels from their side, to care about others' experience. Sherry Turkle claims that this decline of empathy comes from a greatly decreased capacity and practice of conversation. Because conversation is the matrix in which we learn empathy. So I don't have the answers to this concern that I have in my leadership of working with students. What I have is a deep feeling of compassion for them. I believe that what I and all of us need most of all to do is to precisely have empathy, or more widely, compassion. And maybe that's the reason why the example of Pope Francis is so important, not just for me or for Catholics, but for so many of us, a pope of mercy, of empathy, of compassion. At the age of 17, he experienced in an unusual way the mercy of God, and that is why he is who he is today. Perhaps we and our students who so stand for justice as we should do, we fail perhaps equally to stand for its twin, which goes under the varied names of mercy, compassion, humaneness, empathy, simple care, kindness. We need to go to the hearts of those to whom we are dedicated, and we need to with patience and care, relate to the kindness and the compassion in them. So in this lesson, for all of us, never give up on listening and looking for the light and the hope of the young. My last lesson. It's based on a conviction from experience, both reflecting on my own experience and watching others, that it's absolutely necessary for leaders to confront their ego, especially the greater their responsibilities and position. The danger is if that people see you as important and treat you as important, you begin to think you are important. If people pay more attention to your voice and your ideas than to the ideas and the voice of others, you begin to think that your voice is exceptional and that your ideas are extraordinary. A great danger for all leaders is grandiosity and exceptionalism. I believe, in fact, that if this is not directly confronted with the help of others, inevitably the ego of leaders becomes inflated and they do become grandiose, and they begin with disastrous consequences to believe that they are an exception to the norms which apply to all people. I see this frequently in others, and I have had to struggle in myself continually to confront my ego, to not let it run away with all of the attention, the deference, and the position. One weekend morning this past year, after I had walked around Green Lake and I was coming back to Seattle U, I came up to a stoplight and I was behind a car, and there was a bumper sticker on the car which read, "Don't believe everything you think." Don't believe everything you think. Now, none of us is aware enough about where our thoughts, our ideas really come from, how much they are perhaps not really our own thoughts, but they're simply our culture doing its thinking through us. Don't believe everything you think. Leaders in particular, because others pay more attention to what they think, are particularly blind about themselves, both what they think as being really their own and who they really are. What I have found is that we really need others to wrest us out of that groove of our self-estimation and our ideas. I use, and I strongly recommend for any and every leader, regular therapy with someone who can help you see more objectively, more truly, what's going on in your life. I also find it is vital to step out of your social class and your situation into the lives of others who are quite different from your class. Be with the homeless, speak to them, look them in the eye, and touch them. Go to a prison and be with people whose life seems sucked out of them. Get to know personally an undocumented immigrant and his or her fears and hopes. Go to a food pantry and hand out food and speak with humbled, shamed moms and dads. Spend time at a community home with people with Down syndrome and hear their simple hopes and their cries for love. Listen to students or your own children and let them dismantle your ego, your grandiosity, your importance, your self-estimation, your assurance about what you think. Visit another country and find the deep humanity and the happiness of people with so much less than you. The antidote to ego is the reality of the other. The antidote to ego is the reality of the other. They hold the key to opening the door to that don't believe everything you think. Learning this is an important lever for the true growth in lived leadership and one of its hardest but most rewarding lessons. So 4 simple lessons. 1, the core of leadership is the integration of the I and the it. 2, leadership must find her or his unique sources of self-renewal. 3, always appeal to the hidden light in others. 4, enter the lives of others to counteract your ego and to learn what you really think and are. Now, when I list out these lessons of leadership like this, they indeed seem like 4 chapters in a handbook by Father Steve on leadership skills. But leadership is such a personal thing, one of the most personal realities that we have, something that comes from the very richness of one's own experience, the truth of one's own life, the blessing and the grace of who we are. I thank God daily for giving me the opportunity to serve as the president of Seattle University these 20 years, and hopefully from that to have something to give from my experience as a help for others, for example, today, to my fellow Rotarians. Thank you very much. I'd be glad to take questions or observations or comments for discussion, please. Oh, here's a leader. Jan?
Thank you, Father Steve. I love seeing you at Green Lake. We share that in common.
We do. Leaders walk around Green Lake.
Leaders walk around Green Lake, in case any of you didn't know that. I am so disturbed by the statistic that you shared that empathy has declined in the last 10 years by 40% among our younger up-and-comers. It's part of the reason that Leadership Tomorrow will always take place in a classroom, face-to-face, not online. My question is, how do we help younger people get away from the screens and talk to each other more so they develop that empathy?
It has to be very, very intentional. I mean, I think the main cause is the distraction and therefore not needing to enter into conversation. And it has to be very, very intentional of constructing the situations, whether in the classroom or at home around the dinner table or inviting over a few friends of your son or your daughter. It can't just think it's going to happen, but it has to be very, very structured. It's so very hard for the students or young people generally to stop and to go within and to be able to enter into that conversation. I think good universities have methods for creating that conversation. I think good leadership programs like the one you've led have ways of getting people to develop that empathy. There's nothing like going to another country and sort of having that sense of yourself being changed by finding people who have so much less and yet seem much happier and deeper in their humanity. So breaking out of that, I really think that one of the things that concerns me most is that I don't think we realize how much there's a groove that we're all in that is the groove of an omnipresent American culture. And we ourselves need to find the way to find ourselves out of it in order to expand and to find other dimensions to life than the ones that are presented to us all the time. I don't know if I'm right on this, but my sense is culture is always present to us. So we didn't grow up in a culture-free time when we were children or we were young, but I believe it's 10 times more present and prevalent today, the way it bombards younger people than the culture did in our time and the way in which it came to us, because there's so many more ways in which it's mediated to us. And therefore the challenge of resting from it in order to have the conversation it has to be very structured and very kind of intentional. That would be my response on that. Thanks for asking, Jan.
Father Steve, brilliant. Your thought about the culture, you're basically reminding us that since there's so many people between 20 and 30, that the culture has basically adopted their modus operandi. So in lieu of all of us voting you as a write-in candidate for mayor, what advice would you have for the people that run the city when one large company is bringing in thousands of people that fit your description every year?
Wow, so I don't think that it's the young people that are shaping the culture. I think it's the culture that is shaping the young people. And I think we underestimate how much it's also shaping us. We're not immune from it ourselves. It's just so predominant in everything that it just comes to us. Now, I'm a Jesuit, and a Jesuit believes that God works within culture. So we believe you don't go put God in culture, but you try to find out, well, what is God doing in culture? God is active in American culture. God's active within people who are committed to environmental progress. God is active within people in terms of feminism and women's agenda. God's active within our culture in the explosion of knowledge. God's active in a lot of ways within our culture. So I wouldn't want you to get the idea that we should sort of like, we live in an evil culture and it's all about death or it's all dark and we need to, wrest ourselves from it. We have to discern about what of our culture are we going to prioritize and what of it we're not. So there's so much about our culture that we can all make the choices about, well, what of our culture am I going to prioritize and allow to have more of an influence on my life rather than simply to take it as it is. If we simply accept it as it is, it's going to put us in this groove, I think, that is very hard to get out of. So I don't know about the people who are being employed by our higher technology kind of companies and what they come from, but they've got to be a lot like our own students in college and a little bit ahead of them in terms of their own era. I'm more concerned about the present students. There seems to be a change in the last 5 years or so in terms of the students and the lack of sort of their empathy or their ability to enter into the experience of another. I just think this is something that we all need to hold up and make the choices in our own lives about how are we going to allow what we experience, what about it are we going to accentuate and sort of that we can live more fully who we are. So thanks for that. One more question, short one.
Short last question.
Oh gosh, Fred. Hi, Fred.
As a keen observer on America, would you give us a quick comment on free speech in America these days?
Wow, that's a big subject for university presidents about free speech. I mean, the challenge on it really is having to free speech and safety. And people ask me what would I do about certain kinds of groups coming on to Seattle University, and if they're invited by faculty, would we allow them to come and to speak? And we would weigh that very, very carefully against the value of safety. And if we felt that it would jeopardize the safety of our students, we believe that's a higher priority or a higher value than simply the freedom of speech of any kind. And therefore, there would be instances, and I think that's true now of most universities, where we would curtail some free speech if it might lead to a dangerous or an unsafe situation, not only for our students, but for others who might be part of our campus. It's a serious issue. The problem is often you have an issue that goes on campus and then people from the outside from various kinds of agenda glom onto it. I had a good conversation with George Bridges of Evergreen State University about the very, very difficult situation they had there, particularly because of who came into their campus and got a board on it, rather than they could have solved that themselves much better if they had been dealing with their own faculty and their own students rather than outside kind of forces. But that's some of the issues that are involved with that, Fred. Thanks for asking. Thanks, everybody.